and by the resources that they had, which are, compute, data, and capital. I think the real question is this the kind of innovation we want? If this innovation is going to serve Microsoft's bottom line, how ChatGPT and similar technologies are constructed and who they will work for, what they do, are made by a handful of people at the executive level of, in this case, a US-based corporation.
はい、ピボットの竹下です。今日はですね、メレディス・ウィテカーさんに話を聞きます。メレディスはですね、元 Google 社員で、なおかつですね、アメリカの連邦取引委員会の AI 関連アドバイザーも務めた、この人工知能界の、かなり大物なんですよね。そして彼女の特徴、なんといってもこのチャット GPT をはじめとした AI の危険性を訴えていて、今本当に世界中の人が彼女の言葉に耳を傾けている。日本のインタビューに受けるのは非常に貴重なことなので、ちょっと早速話を聞いていきたいと思います。ポイントはですね、チャット GPT、もちろんテクノロジー的にはすごいんですが、マイクロソフトとか、そういった大きなテク企業、一握りの企業にこの技術が渡ってしまっているということを問題視しているんですね。どこが課題で、どうすればこの独占状態を克服できるのか、早速話を聞いてみたいと思います。So, Meredith, welcome to PIVOT, welcome to our show. Thanks for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, I just heard that you recently visited Japan. What was your purpose of your visit?
We were in Japan to meet people. We were in Japan to learn a bit more about how people in Japan use messaging and how they think about privacy, and to tell people about Signal and the differences between Signal and other surveillance messaging apps. And we were also there to attend a conference which gathered the leading cryptographers from around the world to discuss issues that are very important to Signal around privacy and security.
Could you quickly explain what Signal is for people who are not familiar with?
Absolutely. Signal is the most widely used, truly private messaging app on the planet. It is a messaging app that may look or feel like WhatsApp or Line or Kakao, but under the surface, it's very different. We go to great lengths to collect no information about the people who use Signal. So we don't have copies of people's messages, and we don't collect information about who people are, who they're talking to, or anything else. So we try to ensure the level of privacy and safety that you would have in a in-person conversation where you're just talking to your friends, but we try to ensure that in the form of a digital app.
What was the reaction of the Japanese people when they heard about Signal?
Well, I think people really liked it and understand the importance of being able to speak to each other intimately and privately without having corporations or governments or hostile actors able to see what you say and potentially misuse private information. And really, this has been similar all over the world. People understand that they want to be able to have intimate conversations and not to have those conversations spied on by third parties. If you imagine for a moment, if every email you'd ever written or every line message you'd ever sent was suddenly on the internet, and all of your friends and family and everyone else was able to search through it, it's a really hard thing to imagine, right? It makes me feel almost panicked.
Yeah.
And I think everyone in the world knows that they really need to be able to express themselves without that risk, and that's what we work to provide.
Do you feel there's a difference between people in Japan and people in the United States, how they think about privacy and how they think about messaging apps?
Well, I don't think I have enough experience or expertise to really make a call. I'm a person who is from the United States. I grew up in the United States, and I don't know Japan well, even though I love it. So I was a guest when I was visiting, and I think people who have a better understanding of both would probably have a better answer to that question. But I don't want to make things up based on just a couple of visits. I do think, fundamentally human beings recognize that they need to be able to express themselves to each other. And I don't think that changes based on, culture or geography. Of course, there are other differences that are important, but I'll leave those to people who have more expertise than I do.
I also believe people are talking about ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. Were there any conversation you had with the Japanese people and experts in Japan?
There were. I had a lovely academic conversation and lecture at Glocom in Tokyo that where I was able to discuss with experts and academics some of the risks of ChatGPT and to get into some of the details of how ChatGPT works and how the business practices of the tech industry structure who ChatGPT and other AI technologies work for.
So in your opinion, what's the most important problem about ChatGPT? What should we worry most about?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally the danger, the problem with AI technologies like ChatGPT and other large-scale AI technologies is that only a handful of corporations in the world have the resources necessary to develop and deploy these technologies. These are the corporations like the large tech companies in the US and China, which is where these entities are based, who have huge amounts of computing power. So they have a lot of servers. They have huge amounts of data, and this data is generally gathered through some form of surveillance practice. And they are able to pay the highly trained practitioners who can develop and train these models. So these are ultimately corporate technologies. And the danger is that they will be shaped ultimately to serve a given corporation's bottom line, to produce profits and growth, even when these objectives are not aligned with the public good and the public interest.
But some people argue that it was because of these great tech companies that we were able to create such kind of AI in a fast pace, compared to maybe if it were a government trying to create an AI, it will be very slow and we will not have ChatGPT. Do you think big corporations kind of played a role in order for us to innovate and create such AI?
Well, I don't think such AI, or I don't think the technologies that exist now that we are calling AI could exist without the tech industry and the surveillance business model at the heart of the tech industry. So these are fundamentally technologies that were shaped by the consolidation of resources and power in the hands of a handful of tech companies and by the resources that they had, which are compute, data, and capital. However, I don't know, I think the real question is, is this the kind of innovation we want? If this innovation is going to serve Microsoft's bottom line and not actually be governed in a democratic way such that we make decisions about whether and how this technology is applied, such that we have real guardrails on how this technology is used, such that we are tackling issues of misinformation, issues of automation and labor replacement, and some of these other real social issues that affect billions of people, even as the decisions about how ChatGPT and similar technologies are constructed and who they will work for, what they do, are made by a handful of people at the executive level of, in this case, a US-based corporation.
Why do you think this happened? Why do you think only a handful of corporations are able to handle this technology? Well, what made this happen?
To answer that question, I think we can look back in history a little bit. And, I will speak from a US perspective. That's what I know, but there was, there's obviously a rich global history here as well. So in the U.S. and this is true generally, the internet was sort of started. It was funded as a military project.
Yes.
And this military project, as the Cold War changed, became kind of a research network. So it was military initiatives that built this research network that ended up connecting different universities in the United States. And that's what the internet was up until the 1990s. And in the 1990s, we had a surge of neoliberal policy that trended toward privatizing public assets, such as the internet. So it was around this time that network was privatized, and that private businesses were invited to find business models that could commercialize that, internet products and services, or networked computation that was made available by access to this network. So in the 90s, you begin to see, the internet become a consumer technology. You have AOL, you have the dot-com boom, and you have a search for business models that would be able to make money providing services over network computation. Now, the business model that ultimately succeeded, as we all know, is surveillance advertising. So you gather a lot of information, you create a lot of data about people, about their habits, about what they click on, about whatever else you can gather. And you use that information to create statistical profiles about people. So, a woman who lives in Brooklyn who likes coffee. And then you sell access to those profiles to advertisers. So if an advertiser wants to sell shoes to women in Brooklyn who like coffee, they would buy access to my profile and other people who sort of fit that statistical template based on the surveillance data that had been sort of collected and aggregated about me and other people like me. So, how does this relate to AI in the present? Well, the infrastructures needed to succeed at the surveillance advertising business model are the same infrastructures that are underwriting the AI today. So you have huge amounts of data collected about people like me, or put on social media platforms, however it is, these companies collect huge amounts of data. You have massive computational infrastructures that are already designed to collect and store and process this data. And of course, you have, a lot of capital. So you can pay the AI engineers or the people who write beautiful linear algebra to come work for you, to build your AI systems. So that's the reason, in my view, or the primary reason, that it was around the early 2010s, as you saw the large tech companies consolidate their reach and consolidate what many call to a monopoly, that you also saw the rise of AI. Because AI is very old. AI, the term AI was coined in the late 1950s, and we've seen AI development in fits and starts across that timeline. But the reason we're seeing it now is that people recognize that they could make old technologies, old approaches, do new things when they had access to massive troves of surveillance data and the availability of huge, computational servers that they could use to train these. Both of those things are ultimately the products of the surveillance business model. And this explains why only a handful of companies have been able to develop and deploy the kind of AI we're talking about when we discuss things like ChatGPT.
So in terms of AI, do you think we are at least heading to the right directions? So in other words, if it were not the tech companies taking control, if they were to share information and be more open, do you think we're heading to the right direction? Or do you think we should also switch or pivot our direction of creating AI, or even stop creating AI?
Well, I am, as a scholar and a person, I'm less interested in AI as a set of technologies than I am on what their effects on the ability to live, happy and free lives for people are. So I think that is really the question, not, is the technological development moving in the right direction? The question is, how do we make sure that people are able to live, happy, dignified lives? And then say, ask the question, does this technology help that, or does it hurt it? Does technology that is, in the hands of corporations who may be compelled or, at least motivated to license that to militaries or, to predatory organizations or others, does that help people? And if the answer is no, I think the question is like, how do we shape it differently, or how do we reject it entirely? But when I think about this, I'm less interested in the technology itself than in ensuring that it is not used in oppressive ways to execute, social control or, labor degradation or other things that could hurt a large number of people.
So who should take control of such technology like AI? The government or citizens, or what is your opinion?
Well, I think, certainly there is a role for governments in stepping in with large scale regulation. And you see in the EU, you have the AI Act under discussion, which is right now being shaped. There have been a number of proposals in the US for AI regulation and even, some AI bans in a number of states, which are looking to ban, invasive tools of surveillance like facial recognition, and in some cases have been successful. So I think, there's certainly a role for governments, but, in many cases, AI is a very flexible set of technologies. So you have AI deployed in workplaces, you have AI deployed in schools, you have people experimenting with AI in healthcare settings, and many, many others. So, my view of this is that the people in those specific contexts who know the histories of their domain, who understand the practical day-to-day workings of how, their, whether it's a school or a hospital function, should be in charge of, defining these technologies and determining whether they're used at all. Because, you can't sit in a conference room in Silicon Valley and simply imagine everything that, will exist in a hospital in Tokyo, where your technology may actually be tested and tried by real people who have real stakes and risks from using it. You actually need to let the people on the ground lead with their expertise and their knowledge of their circumstances.
So in reality, how can people take such a role? Because even experts may not 100% understand what's happening with ChatGPT. How can we, normal citizens be aware and take control of AI?
Well, I think there are many different modalities. I will point to an example in New York State, where I live, of a school district, the Lockport School District, that had proposed to introduce facial recognition to monitor students and ultimately to invade their privacy in the name of safety. But we know that these technologies don't always work and that there's no evidence that mass surveillance increases safety. So the parents at that school pushed back. They showed up to parents' meetings and city council meetings, and they basically gathered together and decided that, based on their expertise, based on their care for their children, based on their understanding of the school and what was best for them and their children, that they didn't want facial recognition in the school. And they were able to push back on it and stall and ultimately stop that deployment. So I think that's a small example of, a very practical way that we've seen people, govern these technologies and decide whether they make sense or not, even if there's a profitable contract that had been signed between a company and the school. Ultimately, it should be the parents and the people who are guardians of the children who are deciding.
Wow, that's a great example. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's cool, huh?
Mhm. So in order to take such action, do you think companies such as Meta, Microsoft should be more open about their technologies in AI, or do you think even there should be a law that these companies should be transparent?
Oh, I mean, I absolutely think it is helpful to know more about these technologies.
Mhm.
If we don't know the data that an AI system was trained on, we don't know much about how it's going to respond to the world.
Mm.
But even if we do know the data, these technologies often behave in strange ways when they, meet the light of the sun, when they're actually used in the real world.
Mm.
So simply having transparency is necessary, but it's not sufficient for governing these technologies.
Mhm.
I actually think that a really positive step in the right direction would be to be transparent about the contracts between AI companies and the businesses and institutions that license this AI. Because one thing that isn't often made clear, because these contracts are fairly secret or are usually very secret, is that many AI startups are in fact just repackaging AI that is being built by the large cloud companies. So there are many, many companies right now that call themselves AI companies that have contracts with Microsoft that are effectively licensing the GPT API, so access to GPT, paying Microsoft for access to GPT via Microsoft, by signing a contract to use Microsoft's Azure cloud services. And that's very common. That happens. Amazon has a facial recognition AI API called Recognition that many people license. And Google has the same thing. So the large AI companies have effectively charge startups to use their AI, and the startups repackage that AI and deploy it in ways that we often don't know about or can't fully trace. So beginning to make those relationships clear will, one, show just how concentrated the AI industry is. So many of these startups that we count as AI companies, alongside Meta, alongside Amazon, alongside Microsoft, are in fact simply riding on the back of these companies. And it will also help us understand exactly where these technologies are being deployed in the real world. Because we will recognize that, hey, the facial recognition company that is trying to sell facial recognition to this school district is licensing that facial recognition from Amazon. And so we should recognize, that Amazon may be a better party to talk to when that facial recognition has problems, or when we want to reject that facial recognition altogether.
Is there a way to track down? Because it seems to me that the system is so complicated and it's very difficult to track these small startups. Is there a way to track what kind of startups are there in the industry?
I mean, we have things like Crunchbase and other
yes.
databases of startups, but there's no official log of these startups. And there's certainly no information about which startups are licensing AI from which companies. That information, in my experience as someone who worked at Google for over 13 years, is some of the most secret information they have. They don't want that information to be made public. And so, my knowledge of those relationships, comes from talking to people, from having been inside the company, from having seen how this works, and from working in the tech industry where some of this knowledge is shared among peers, but it is not public information. And I think we need to recognize that as a huge barrier to accountability and to democratic governance.
So Meredith, you have worked in Google. So what are these tech companies thinking about it right now? Are they aware of the problem? Are they on the same page, or they're just growing fast and faster? What are they thinking right now?
Well, I think tech, I would say corporations don't really think. There's a lot of people inside corporations that think, but corporations themselves, they have a couple of goals, and those goals are structured in how they are shaped, in how they are held accountable by the board, and ultimately in how, their executives are either, fired or given a bonus, right? And those goals are pretty simple. We all know them. It's increasing profits, exponentially forever, and increasing growth exponentially forever. So those are the core engines that power the modern shareholder-driven corporation. And that's not very controversial. That's just what they do. And, if an executive were to say, you know what, ethically, I think we have to disclose all these contracts, and I know that's going to lose us $1 billion, but this is simply the right thing to do in the name of democratic governance of powerful technology, that executive would be fired very quickly from the board. Right? So there's a fundamental tension here, which is why I point to the issue of, particularly corporate control of these technologies. Because the objectives powering the modern corporation are not the objectives of public good, of social benefit, or of, democratic governance.
I want to talk about a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. I read in paper that the White House released, I think it's more than 70 pages. What's your take on that? Is it effective or?
Well, it's not actually a Bill of Rights because it has no legal power. So I think, it was a good statement, and it articulated many of the issues that we see with these AI technologies. But I would classify it more as, an exercise in public relations, in articulating the fact that the executive branch does have these values and does see these issues, which is good. But it is in no way binding. So it was more akin to a statement of values than to a legislative or regulatory document. So it remains to be seen how the federal government acts on those principles, if at all.
So do you think there needs to be more regulations, more action?
I mean, I certainly think there need to be more curbs on the use and application of these powerful technologies. And particularly, I think one avenue that hasn't been pursued in the context of AI regulation, and that my colleagues at the AI Now Institute just wrote about in their 2023 landscape report, is the use of data minimization and privacy regulation to curb the rapid development of AI systems. Because of course, these systems are reliant on vast databases, and those databases are collected by some form of surveillance. So if you begin to curb surveillance, if you begin to clamp down on the invasion of privacy and the collection and creation of huge amounts of data about all of us, you also limit the capabilities for AI development.
See. So you talked about AI Now Institute. Could you tell our audience what it is and what, such a university can take a part role in regulating AI?
Yeah, the AI Now Institute is a research institute that looks at the social implications of AI, particularly focused on this concentration of power in the industry and how the political economy of the AI industry works. It's led by Amba Kok, who is a scholar and was formerly a senior advisor to Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, and Sarah Myers-West, who is also a scholar and worked with Amba as a senior advisor to Lena at the Federal Trade Commission. I have been involved in the AI Now Institute since its founding. I was a co-founder of the AI Now Institute and its faculty director, until I also went to the Federal Trade Commission before joining Singal as their president.
So what role can such institute play? Do you think there needs to be more organizations, similar organizations?
Absolutely. I think much of what we know about AI and technology in general has been written by the marketing departments of large tech corporations.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important that we have independent and critical perspectives and scholarship that are helping us better understand how these technologies actually work, and that are pushing back against a lot of the hype that is not grounded in science or any evidence, but that is, claiming things like, AI is superhuman. AI is better at thinking than a human being. All things that have no evidence, but that nonetheless are, powerfully stated or amplified by many of the companies and many of the people at the companies that, ultimately have a vested interest in seeing these technologies, infiltrate further into our social fabric.
See. I want to talk about government regulations again, because in Japan, there's less trust on the government, because in Japan, people working in the government still use fax machines, and they're not keen to technology and digital information. So do you think we can still believe the government? Because I recall when Mark Zuckerberg was invited to Congress and he was questioned about how he makes money or how he makes business, and the senators didn't even know it was run by ads. So do you think the government or politicians are keeping up with the technology?
Well, not always, but I also don't think technology should be able to set the pace for everyone else. And I do think, I don't see government as an independent entity that we simply leave alone to do its business and hope that it keeps up, hope that it reads, the literature, hope that it has a nuanced understanding. I think government needs to be pushed.
Yes.
And, it particularly needs to be pushed in the context of the US and, and Europe and elsewhere, where you now see these large tech companies spending more than the big oil and big tobacco companies combined on lobbying. So every day, the federal government in the US and governments elsewhere are already being pushed by lobbyists who are employed by these tech companies to tell them how great ChatGPT is, or to advertise Google's Bard, or to argue against regulations that would hurt these companies' bottom lines. So I think those of us, like the folks at the AI Now Institute, like the folks at the DARE Institute, like the people, the people who are doing the work trying to, clarify and ground our understanding of technology and AI in evidence and science, need to also be pushing. We can't simply hope or assume that government officials will, suddenly, will do their homework and will act on their conscience.
Interesting. So, Meredith, you founded AI Now Institute, and you have been pointing out the dangers of technology and AI. Did you imagine this high pace of ChatGPT coming to the world such fast, or is it the pace? Is it what you imagined, or do you think it was beyond your imagination?
Well, I think we've had large language models for some time now. And this is the sort of architecture that ChatGPT is built on. And so I knew about those technologies, and I'd seen demos, and they were, interesting. And so, I don't think ChatGPT is as much a huge change, although the development of large language models has certainly inflated the scale of these AI systems. I think what is different about ChatGPT is that it has an interface that billions of people can use.
Right.
Suddenly, all of us are able to have a little experience with these technologies that, 5 years ago, we would simply have to trust the pages of Wired or the pages of the New York Times to affirm for us that, in fact, AlphaGo, which is a technology out of DeepMind, beating Go was important. but we weren't actually experiencing that. We were trusting that. And so I think the change that we've seen that is so significant, of course, there have been, many iterations of, these technologies, and there's, real fundamental scientific work that has gone into shaping these large language models. However, what has really changed, in my view, and why we're seeing again this sort of swell of hype and excitement, has to do with the fact that we're all now able to experience it. And so Microsoft was very clever in setting up ChatGPT as an interface that we could log into and use.
Yeah, it's like a simple search engine. Yeah,
exactly. And it's a very good ad for ChatGPT. Now, it also costs a lot of money to run. And I think we need to name that. The estimates are somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion a year simply to run ChatGPT. That's not the cost of training. That's not the cost of, the labor that, has to build it. So we need to recognize also that ChatGPT is effectively a very expensive advertisement that is advertising to these startups, to militaries, to governments, to whoever might have the capital, that they can license ChatGPT from Microsoft's infrastructure, that they can access this technology. And that is, in fact, the business model that is sort of floated on the narrative of ChatGPT, which we've now all experienced and can attest does very impressive things, thanks to the scale and data that those engineers were afforded.
I see. So what puzzles me is that why did OpenAI teamed up with Microsoft? Because they were supposed to be, non-profit and kind of a capped profit model. Why do you think they teamed up with Microsoft?
Well, I think it's kind of simple, and it's because Microsoft has the infrastructure. So ultimately, to build these systems, you need that infrastructure. And part of the deal that brought OpenAI into Microsoft was that they would be able to use the Azure cloud infrastructure that Microsoft owns to develop these technologies.
Yes.
Otherwise, they would simply be paying Microsoft every month, or Amazon to access AWS, or Google to access Google Cloud. They would have to pay one of them, or one of those companies, to get access to compute. So it's easier to just fold in, because ultimately you need it anyway, and the scale at which you need it makes it much cheaper to simply align with one of the large corporations than to pay them every month, because you can get a better deal via the economies of scale. I think the cap profit model, I would just speak to that as it's a big gimmick, right? Because it's capped profit is many times the initial investment is the cap, and so in OpenAI's case, that's like $1 trillion. So if we look at that, almost every company is a capped profit model in practice, because you're never going to make 100 times that initial investment. So I think they're very good at marketing, but ultimately they are an arm of Microsoft, which is fully a for-profit corporation. And I think using the term open, the sort of shift from a nonprofit, the use of the term, capped, it all gives them kind of the aura of an organization that is invested in the public good in some way. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the facts, they're an arm of Microsoft. I would be very worried about anyone who had learned their discipline via ChatGPT. It's like an uncle who's just always talking about stuff they don't know. ChatGPT is like that uncle on steroids. But I would not have that uncle tutor my kid.
We don't have such company that can create ChatGPT, and there's some business magazines write stories that we need to catch up and create our own ChatGPT. Do you agree with that opinion?
Do we want to put our energy into racing to claim that we have the best technology so that we can beat the US and China? Or are there other things that Japan can invest in? What is actually good for people in Japan to ensure well-being and longevity and a happy life? That's the real question.